Welcome to Sunday Take, this special edition with the U.S. Senate debate between Senator Amy Klobuchar and Republican Royce White. This debate is brought to you by AARP and Minnesota's credit unions. We want to thank them for supporting our programming. We're going to dive right in today, and it was chosen to let Senator Klobuchar decide, and she has chosen to go second. And so when we start with 2-minute opening statements, candidates will also have 2 minutes to answer questions and a 30-second rebuttal. Royce White, you start with the opening statement.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I appreciate all the Minnesotans that are tuned in and everybody else around the country. To start, our country is coming undone at the seams, and I think we can change that, but it's going to require some truth. If there's one thing I'm proud of, despite the mainstream media's attempts to silence, suppress, smear my campaign, the feedback that we have gotten from those who support and follow me or the campaign or the movement nationally, they say that they appreciate that I speak the truth. And truthfully, it's ironic to me that this race is even close. And I don't say that to disrespect Senator Klobuchar here or any of the Minnesotans that did their civic duty and casted their ballot already, but I do say to the rest of Minnesotans that still have a chance to vote in this election, if you vote for the same things, you're most likely going to get the same result. And that's certainly the case in this race, but all across the country. There is a permanent political class in America. There is an establishment on both sides of the aisle. I threaten that status quo, and I plan to articulate how during this debate today, and I want to thank Senator Amy Klobuchar for participating.
Senator Klobuchar, you have 2 minutes for your opening statement.
I'm Amy Klobuchar, you're a United States Senator, and I ask for your support whether you are a Democrat, Republican, or Independent. We are living in incredibly divisive times right now politically. Yet through it all, I see the best in Minnesota when I go to all 87 counties, whether it's in the rural areas, the suburbs, or in the cities. And what I do is listen to people and get things done. And I think that's what we need in Washington right now, not more divisiveness. When our manufacturers and farmers said they were having trouble paying these international shipping conglomerates, I joined in with Senator John Thune of South Dakota, and we passed a landmark bill to bring down those prices. When the pharmaceutical companies got this sweetheart deal with Medicare, I came in and introduced a bill that has now the law of the land that says, no, you've got to negotiate prices. And we're starting to see the $35 cap on insulin, things that matter to Minnesota. When our veterans came to me and said, hey, people are dying because they were stationed next to burn pits, I did something about it. But our challenges are still there. While our economy continues to expand in Minnesota, we need housing for workers. You can't go to work if you don't have a place to live, and that means affordable at all levels. We need child care incentives so that we have more child care facilities, and we need to continue to focus on public safety. I have the endorsement of the peace and police officers and the firefighters of Minnesota because I stand up for public safety. Courage in these next few years is not going to be standing by yourself, yelling at people, or being alone. Courage is whether or not you're willing to stand next to someone you don't always agree with for the betterment of this country. That's what I will continue to do as your senator.
The first question is about the economy. The economy has been the number one issue for about a year nationally in all polls. Minnesota's economy has not grown as fast as it has historically. Senator Klobuchar, 2 minutes to you. What can Washington do to help Minnesota's economy, and what would you support as reasonable to change the economic situation for most Minnesotans?
So Minnesota is a good place to live in for our workers and for our businesses. We're actually number 6 in the country for doing business, according to CNBC, and we have one of the lower unemployment rates. I'm really proud of our state. We're the state that brought the world everything from the pacemaker to the Post-it note. We are 4th in the country for agriculture exports, and we just keep moving forward. But what are our challenges? Well, we need to keep training the workers of the day, and that means innovative things with apprenticeships, with 1- and 2-year degrees, with high schools that are focused on getting kids to the jobs that we have today and tomorrow. 3-year degrees, like we're seeing right now in Rochester, Morris, I was just in both those towns, and Crookston, in terms of what we can do to make this education experience better for our kids. Secondly, as I mentioned, we've got challenges with childcare and housing, and we can't keep expanding if we don't meet those challenges. That's really important. Infrastructure. It's one of the reasons that I led the broadband bill to get high-speed internet to every corner of the state. Those are the challenges in front of us. But in the end, we must be an innovative state. Technology has been a plus, but it's also been a burden for families and parents and what their kids see. I'm leading the way to put guardrails on technology, and that is part of our economic focus. My opponent wants to get rid of the Federal Reserve. I think that will set us backward when it comes to going forward and expanding our economy.
Royce White, 2 minutes. What would you do as a U.S. Senator to improve Minnesota's economy?
Well, first of all, I want to harken back to what was said in the previous open statement. I do think that we live in divisive times. Some of it is rightful and warranted. I think sometimes as a leader, you do have to stand alone and speak to uncomfortable and inconvenient truths, and I definitely plan to do that. I've been doing that most of my adult career on the public stage, and it's no different with the economy. And I'll take this time to speak to a much deeper issue. I don't think it's we can go into individual policies, but the real issue here is that the post-World War II democratic liberal order, otherwise known as the international rules-based order, deeply dependent on foreign policy, was built upon a bunch of lies, mostly economic, and the status of our United States dollar as the reserve currency and what that implies all around the world. And ultimately, we said we were going to take freedom and democracy all around the world by peace through strength and make nations self-determining. We really made them dependent. And we see that on an ongoing basis all around the world. And what that has yielded is that our American government and much of our global economy doesn't have anything to offer Minnesotans or any other Americans but death and debt. We have a death and debt-based economy, and it's crushing the American middle class and working class. And mostly because the American working class and middle class is paying to uphold that global structure from here to Beijing, but also because we make them pay 3-4 times over. You pay the inflation, you pay the tax, and then they're going to make you pay the interest to get crushed by the policy. It's obscene.
Next question is...
Can I get a rebuttal on that?
You can. 30 seconds.
When I look at the Federal Reserve, I look at what it's done. When we have been able to get out of the last downturn in 08, 09, the Federal Reserve played a major part in that. I don't know what my opponent's plan would be. If we get rid of the Federal Reserve, are we going to let politicians take over our monetary policy? Are we going to be like Argentina or Turkey? That makes no sense to me. And so I just think, or are we going to go back to the gold standard? Because that's what we had before we had the Federal Reserve. That is going to be very disruptive to our economy.
Royce White, you have 30 seconds.
Well, the fact of the matter is, since the inception of the Federal Reserve, the United States dollar has lost most of its purchasing power. And that is a serious implication for United States consumers and American working class citizens. I wouldn't be opposed to going back to the gold standard, contingent upon a few other international economic monetary policies to accompany it. But the Federal Reserve has had people from within its own institution that have openly criticized, and they weren't far right-wing Republicans, by the way, who have criticized the way that institution has handled monetary policy. And I don't think we should give it to politicians. I think it should go to a more genuine free market capitalism, and not like Obama, who socialized the risk after the bailouts in 2009.
The next question is about foreign policy, and the question goes to you first, Royce White. The world is currently in many multipolar disputes, including 2 wars. You have stated several times that we need to end forever wars. How do you balance America's national security with global security, and what is the U.S. role?
Well, I think, and the theme of the campaign has been border debt forever wars. Our country is bankrupt. We have to close our borders and end the wars. Reason being is because the 3 are inextricably linked. I don't think that we can talk about national security without first prioritizing the border, which this administration and many before it, both in the executive but also in the Senate and House, haven't prioritized. And So the border needs to be the first order of national security business. Further than that, I want America to have a strong military. The question is where that military is getting involved and for what reasons. When I hearken back to the post-World War II democratic liberal order, much of our foreign policy is not original foreign policy. Much of it is Great Britain's foreign policy. You look back at their war with China, or in the South Pacific, you look at their war with Russia over the course of 200 years from the 1800s, and you look at the Middle East, which was basically orchestrated by Great Britain's land ownership there as well. So America doesn't have a real authentic foreign policy. I would like to see us have that. But right now, our border's wide open, so that has to be the first thing that we deal with. And as a general principle, I don't want us to be on both sides of every war. We tend to find ourselves on both sides of every war. We fund both sides of the war, and that's a non-starter in my opinion.
Senator Klobuchar, you have 2 minutes on what the U.S. role is in global security and how we can deal with these multiple wars around the world.
The U.S. plays a major role in global security. We're the greatest country in the world, but we have to balance that all the time with our own investments in our own nation. One of the ways we are strongest is when our economy is strong, and that is something that has been improving after the pandemic on a monthly basis. But the other piece of this is making sure that we are investing in our military so we can build on that strength and doing it in a smart way. There has to be oversight. I have not voted for every weapon system. We need to be smart about that. But when you look at a situation like Ukraine, where Vladimir Putin has invaded a sovereign nation and has paired up now with countries like North Korea and China and Iran, these are not our friends.
Rebuttal.
So for us to be sitting out there and trying to diminish the role of our military, when my opponent has said that the bad guys won in World War II, that's a quote from this year, when he said that there were no good guys in World War II, that's an insult to our veterans and those who serve in our military. For me, I believed in giving them the resources that they need. That includes the C-130J planes that I worked with our Republicans and Democrats in our delegation that you now see coming into the 133rd Fighter Wing right in the Twin Cities, including the support we've given to the Bulldog up in northern Minnesota. And that means making sure that our veterans are treated well, not only while they serve, but when they come home to the United States, including the kind of health care they give. When they signed up to serve, there wasn't a waiting line. And when they come to our country, there shouldn't be one either.
Royce White, 30-second rebuttal.
Well, first of all, it just is a matter of fact that the Russians were a communist regime, a totalitarian communist regime that saw 20 million Christians die under their rule there in Russia. So definitively, they were bad guys, in my opinion. Not only that, but we did incorporate Nazi scientists into our military and our academic institutions after World War II. So those were bad guys as well. I didn't say that there were no good guys. I said the bad guys won, and they did. And in addition to that, the one thing the permanent political class seems to agree on is military spending, and they will not do it with oversight.
Senator Klobuchar, rebuttal.
Well, actually, in your Twitter feed in 2022, you said, "It dawned on me today the bad guys won in World War II. There were no good guys in that war." And then in 2024, you said, well, I think the bad guys did win in World War II. You tell that to Earl Myers, who is a veteran who served both in the Korean War and in World War II. He just got the Purple Heart. He has a shrapnel in his leg to show it. And I think when you look at the U.S. and you step back, this is not the kind of rhetoric that we need. We don't need untruths. We need someone who's going to go in there and be willing to stand up for our country, our democracy, not just here, but around the world.
Next question is about the Middle East. We are currently in the most heated multipolar conflict in the Middle East between Israel and other countries. Question is to you first, Senator Klobuchar. What is the U.S. role, and how can we bring peace back to the Middle East?
Well, the U.S. role is to do all we can to bring peace with our diplomats and with our relationships there. I was actually hopeful before October 7th because I believe that the Abraham Accords, which was actually negotiated during the Trump administration, which includes Saudi Arabia, UAE, Israel, could be expanded and could bring us some permanent peace. Unfortunately and sadly and tragically, we saw the invasion by Hamas, the terrorist act thousands of people killed and injured. Since that time, we have seen innocents lost in both Gaza and in Israel. I have been a strong believer in the two-state solution. I still believe in that. I've been to Ramallah. I've, of course, been to Israel. And I believe that we must push for that peace. And that would make a major difference in the entire region so we could go back to negotiating and expanding on the Abraham Accords, which would bring peace to the region.
Royce White, 2 minutes.
Wow, Abraham Accords, point for Donald Trump. I will say to harken back to what I said regarding World War II and the Russians, it boggles my mind that all of the Democrats and liberals and sort of the social scientists from the academic institutions claim that Russia is our greatest national threat and definitive mortal enemy, which draws all the way back to their World War II identity. In many ways, they say that Vladimir Putin wants to reconstruct the former Soviet Union. So they would agree that the Soviets are bad guys, but yet I can't say that the bad guys won the war. It's a matter of fact that the Russians gave 20 million Russian soldiers in order to stop the Germans. And although I see that as a good thing that the Germans were stopped, that doesn't mean that my views change about communist Russia or the 20 million Christians that were genocided in their own country. And regarding the Middle East, look, I think there's a lot that's going on in the Middle East. And I think, like I said earlier on, we're on both sides of that trade. We're on every side of that trade. Our defense of Israel, the way that Israel funds, and our government, AIPAC gives my opponent a ton of money. They wouldn't dare give me a dime, not because I don't like Israel or I don't like Jews. It's more because I would question the role that we play. We know through history, people who fund both sides of wars tend to be people who profit from war continuing, not war stopping. That's a matter of fact throughout history. And we see that now, not only in the Middle East, but plans for the same thing in Ukraine. BlackRock and these other, multinational corporations are lined up on the edges of a war-torn area to rebuild it for profit. And we shouldn't do that as a general principle. And I would bring that type of legislation and standard to the United States Senate.
Again, the key is a ceasefire, a release of the hostages, and then to move to a two-state solution.
Royce White, rebuttal.
Okay. And furthermore, and when I said that the bad guys won World II, I say it for a specific reason. I reject the way that the black identity and the Jewish identity are used in a similar way to push identity politics, which ends up being an expansion of federal government and social programs, or the expansion of the military-industrial complex. Here in America, we use the black identity to expand the federal government and social programs. On the world stage, we use the Jewish identity to expand military-industrial complex, and I reject it, and it offends me, and it should offend blacks and Jews as well.
Next question comes to you, Royce White, first. The border has been, and immigration have been, major issues in this campaign. What you talk about closing the border, what other policies would you support related to immigration in the U.S.?
Well, I think that the pathway to citizenship should be much shorter. I don't agree with how long it takes to become a citizen. But I also worry that we have a false sense of confidence in our ability to properly vet any of these illegal immigrants that cross without documentation. I'm not sure exactly who we're calling to get that information. It seems like too much trust in our own ability to do the proper research in order to create a safe environment or safe process or safe communities for our American citizens. So I would support a moratorium on illegal immigration or even legal immigration to some extent until we get a grip on exactly how that process will work, because we see many processes have broken down for government across the board. I don't understand why immigration, legal or illegal, wouldn't fall under that same standard of continued failure.
Senator Klobuchar, what needs to be done on immigration, both at the border and for expediting legal immigration?
We need to pass the strong border bill that we just voted on a few months ago. Unfortunately, it didn't make it through the Senate. This was a bill that was negotiated by a very conservative Republican, James Lankford. I supported this bill. It would allow for 1,500 new border guards on the border, and I think it is very important to pass that bill because right now we've seen some decreases, but that is simply because there's been an executive order put in place. It's been challenged. I think we're much better off if the Congress comes together for order at the border. At the same time, we need to improve our legal immigration process. And when I talk to people in hospitality in Minnesota, when I visit our farms, when I've been at our, especially greater Minnesota nursing homes and at our hospitals, they need workforce. That's a combination of training our kids that are here now, but it is also using visas and work permits and a legal immigration process that is messed up. You can literally bring in someone legally after they're vetted, but maybe not their spouse, when they actually have a space for them to work when they're a nurse. I lead the bill called Conrad 30 that expands the use of doctors who come from foreign countries, study at our medical school, and then are forced to go back to do their residencies in another country. Let's have them stay here and go to underserved areas, both rural, where we dearly need them, and in urban areas. That's that bill. It's a great example. I have a number of Republicans on the legislation that we need to do some practical things that will help our economy in Minnesota. No great nation has expanded with a shrinking workforce while keeping order at the border.
Royce White, you have 30 seconds.
No great nation has had success with the collapsing birth rate, but we can talk about that later. The issue that she brings up about conservatives or very conservative people supporting the bill is part of a hallmark of my campaign. I've gotten pushback from both sides of the aisle, and I think that's good for the American people. Again, permanent political class, uniparty. The border bill was another example of an omnibus legislation where we put a bunch of things into one bill and pass it through, and we barely give our legislators time to read it, is a bad practice. We need to stop that.
Senator Klobuchar, 30 seconds.
Uniparty is something my opponent talks about a lot, and to me that is rejecting bipartisanship. I have worked with people who are very conservative. Josh Hawley and I have a bill on AI to make sure that we do something about deepfakes. I have worked with Senator Grassley when it comes to making sure that there's competition in the prescription drug market. I have worked with Senator Cornyn of Texas when it comes to our venues that were shut down during the pandemic, and we passed that bill. It was very successful. I don't believe that we should reject bipartisanship. I think we should see more of it.
Next topic would come to you, Senator Klobuchar. One of the major issues right now is government spending through the pandemic and before. What can we do to either cut the federal budget or balance the federal budget in the next 5 to 10 years?
We need to work together as Democrats and Republicans. And there are a lot of things we could do, and we have to take this on. Number one, there are a number, as we look at tax reform next year, we obviously don't want to, nor will I vote for increasing taxes on people making under $400,000 a year. But there are things we can do. We can close the oil loopholes that gives them these special tax advantages, which is not fair to biofuels in Minnesota. That would save $35 billion right there. The Buffett rule, where it says that billionaires should pay not less percentage of their taxes than the secretaries that work for them, that would be over $100 billion that could be brought in. Hedge fund loophole, that would bring in billions and billions of dollars. The corporate tax rate, while I was in the middle of where it should be set, it went all the way down to 21%. If you even raised it up to 25, 26%, that's $150 billion every 10 years that would be brought in that could go toward paying down our deficit. There also is Social Security that I think should be kept in a separate category. If you take what people put in, they stop putting it at $168,000 in income, in their own income. Then you create a donut hole so they don't have to pay in anymore. When you hit it $400,000, you have to pay in more. That would actually keep Social Security solvent. I think there are so many things we can do, including looking at our spending, making decreases, being smart about defense spending, and we will be able to get this deficit under control.
Royce White, 2 minutes on what we need to do on government spending.
Defeat the uniparty. I'm all for bipartisanship if it's run under the right auspices. The consistent of the D.C. elite, the swamp, as we've come to call it, the uniparty, the permanent political class, is that they will spend. And we can say that the Federal Reserve is a grand old institution if we want to, but the fact is the dollar has lost its purchasing power. We're $37 trillion in debt. Inflation is crushing the working and middle class. The people feel it. The single black mothers feel it who work 2 jobs and have to try and make ends meet. Their gas is up 300%. So, the one thing you can say about the United States Senate is every time they pass a continued resolution and they vote to raise the debt ceiling, they are voting for inflationary policy. They are voting for policy that is going to hurt the working class and the middle class. It's become a constant. And I don't know if Senator Klobuchar seems to think that Hawley or Grassley are the standard bearers for the Republican Party. I don't see that to be the case. I like some of the things they have to say, but I wouldn't hesitate to challenge them if need be in order to keep the government from spending the way it's been spending. And even furthermore, when you talk about bipartisanship, which has come to bear in the spending many times, I mean all the time actually, when we say very conservative Republicans or these Republicans agree, the Democrat Party has showed all their cards during this election, during this campaign. The Dick Cheneys of the world are within the scope of Republicans that they believe are reasonable to put out there as good endorsements. There isn't a political archetype worse in this country's history maybe, than Dick Cheney. I mean, the debate should be over there, and it should be over for Trump and Harris as well. But that same bipartisanship, Dick Cheney, Mike Pence, the Bush administration and people who stayed on it and people who were part of that neocon, these people vote for spending through the eyeballs, and the American people have had to pay for it. Not only now, but it's been for a few generations at least.
Senator Klobuchar, 30 seconds.
I would just note that my opponent has gone after everyone. If you listen to his podcast, if you look at his Twitter feed, he goes after Republicans in Minnesota constantly. He goes after Republicans on the national stage constantly, calling them the Ayatollah, calling them the Dark Prince. He calls people fags. He uses names. He uses vulgar language all the time. I don't think that's how you bring people together. And who are his allies? Matt Gaetz. Who are his allies? Alex Jones, who's a conspiratorialist, who basically said that kids who were killed in Sandy Hook, hiding under their desks, were child actors. And my opponent writes on his head, Alex Jones was right.
Royce White, 30 seconds.
So the children in Sandy Hook must be more important than the children there in Iraq that Dick Cheney was responsible for massacring. And the point of the matter is, I do regard Matt Gaetz as a strong and vibrant young leader because he called into question the special interest and lobby money that's in the Congress there. But that's not the issue. The real issue is that we have accepted a leadership that almost requires that you don't really ruffle any feathers. And Amy Klobuchar has been great at that, but we need a new direction, a direction where I want to have good relationships with people, but it's going to be based on the truth. And that has not been the norm in American political culture since the days of John F. Kennedy.
You're listening to a special edition of Sunday Take. I'm your host, Blois Olson. This U.S. Senate debate is brought to you by AARP and Minnesota's credit unions. We're going to take a break, and when we return, the conclusion of this debate. Welcome back to this special U.S. Senate debate between U.S. Senator Amy Klobuchar and Royce White. We have about 25 more minutes left of questions, and then each candidate will have a 2-minute closing statement. My next question is about executive power. Over the last decade, including multiple presidents of multiple parties, the executive branch has used executive power more and more. What can we do to bring balance of power back between the legislative branch and the executive branch? Senator Klobuchar, you go first.
Great question. So I actually supported the work that Senator Kaine did with Republicans on bringing back the war declaration after years and years and years had gone by with Iraq, and it was being used for other wars. And I think that should be Congress's decision. And so there are numerous incidences where I think Congress has ceded too much power, I don't care who's president, to the executive. And I think we need to assert that power. Some examples of this recently that we have done where we've made some changes to rules is, for instance, the Electoral Count Act. After the insurrection on January 6th, I felt it was very important that an archaic rule not be allowed to be used as an assault on our democracy. So, working with Susan Collins and working with people like Joe Manchin and Liz Cheney, we were able to change that law. So it's very clear now that if 20% of the Congress objects to a particular state's electoral votes, then you go back and you have a debate on it and you have a vote instead of just one person. And it's very clear here. Again, why do I mention executive power? There were arguments made at the time that the vice president, then Vice President Pence, could somehow overturn the results of the will of the people. We made that very clear that that was not the case. There are other ways to rein in executive power, and mostly it's by doing your job and passing bills and making sure we have a budget at the end of the year and the like. And I would like to change some of the Senate rules to make it more functional so we can get nominees done and we can move ahead and do our jobs.
Right, so 2 minutes on what we need to do to limit executive power and have more checks and balances in Washington.
Well, I think the biggest checks and balances on Washington needs to be the money that's in our politics, the dark money that's in our politics, the special interests and lobbies, and then the administrative state, and definitely the intelligence community. I'll also say this. I'm no partisan hack here. I'm no Donald Trump sycophant. I'm supporting him 1,000%. I think he's the better candidate, and we agree on a lot of things. But you remember back in 2020, it was mentioned at least that he was considering sending the United States military into Minneapolis to solve some of the issues that had broken out there. Now, I didn't think that was a wise thing to do, and I thought it was probably outside the scope of what a president should be doing. They should always be careful when using the United States military against American citizens. You'll find that in a recent act, the Joe Biden administration has, for the first time, I believe, authorized extensive, maybe lethal force of the United States military or the Department of Defense on American citizens. But I'm not a partisan hack. The thing I have to say, though, about this last comment is January 6th has been hit over the head, and they've beat that dead horse now for 4 years. And the reality is this. It's fine to say that what people did on January 6th was wrong. What's not okay is to say that Donald Trump or myself or any other Americans don't have any right to question our elections, whether they're free and fair. Even my opponent here back in 2018, when it was the Russians, said that we should have backup paper ballots because the machines can be hacked. And Kamala Harris said the same thing. So I reject the narrative around January 6th that a threat to democracy is the general public or American citizens having the fundamental right, freedom of speech, to challenge the legitimacy of elections in general.
Sure. So,
30 seconds.
Yes. I believe strongly that if you're going to have a democracy, that means you don't tell people how to vote, but they have the right to vote and their vote is counted. And I continue to be concerned that my opponent wrote on his head that someone won that last election that didn't and continues to be an election denier. That's not how we do things in Minnesota. When Norm Coleman lost a very close election for the U.S. Senate, he came out and said he had lost. When Rudy Boswich lost as an incumbent, he came out and said he'd lost. When a Democrat and a Republican candidate for governor lost to none other than Jesse Ventura, they came out and said they lost. That's what we do in a democracy. So this election denying, and in this case, Chris Krebs, Trump's head of cybersecurity, said the election was fine. His Attorney General Barr said that there was no widespread fraud in the election, but still my opponent persists with these election denying. And I think that is super scary for our democracy.
Royce White, 30 seconds.
Again, I'll repeat. You and Kamala Harris both said that the elections lacked security back in 2018, all the way up to 2019 before the election actually took place. Furthermore, I'll say again, there are certain Republicans in the party and all across the country that I do not regard as the standard bearers of the movement, and what they choose to do is what they choose to do. Norm Coleman and Rudy Boswich being two of them. I don't regard them as people that would take a hard stand when the time comes to combat the momentum or the decisions or consensus of the Uniparty. And they've been paid handsomely by the Uniparty as well, Norm and Rudy both. Again, I have to stress that it's a fundamental right for American citizens to at least be able to question whether their elections are free and fair, not based on partisanship. When the Democrats think it's not fair, they can say it. When we say it's not fair, all of a sudden we're a threat.
Next question starts with you, Royce White. You have 2 minutes. Did Donald Trump lose Minnesota in 2020?
It would appear so. Yeah, it would appear so. But I can't be sure. And I don't think that that's dangerous to say. Again, I go back to the question, why is it okay that Amy and Kamala both have been open and public in questioning the security of the look. Your average voter machine, and this is the gaffe that the mainstream media has covered up. Your average voter machine has a chain of custody that doesn't even equal up to your average slot machine at a local casino. The reason is because the technology inside the voting machines are considered proprietary technology. And many people believe that you would need to see that technology or be able to forensic audit that technology to find out if there was widespread corruption. And I'm not saying that to undermine the integrity of elections in general, but this is something Americans should be concerned about, which I agree with Amy and Kamala from back in 2018. I don't know why the switch was so stark once they assumed control, and now all of a sudden the election is back on us to take back power, you could say. The switch of the narrative is disingenuous on face value, and I don't like it on either side. If the Republicans win and they say the elections are secure and we haven't solved those issues, I'll stand right up there in the United States Senate and say, don't play this game. If we haven't solved the election security issues, we need to solve them. Any sort of partisan bending of the narrative to try and silence Americans or quell their concerns is un-American, and it borders on being unconstitutional because it is freedom of speech.
Senator Klobuchar, did Donald Trump win 2020 Minnesota?
No, he did not. And I just want to quote my opponent's exact words. In an interview this September, he said, I think Trump won the election. I'm just going to go right out and say, I think he won the 2020 election. I think there was fraud. I think there's a lot of proof there was fraud.
Rebuttal.
So that is his exact words from just last month. And I think it is so important in this times of divisiveness, whether you're a Democrat, Republican, or independent, that we uphold the election results. If you're going to vote for Donald Trump, okay. If you're going to vote for Kamala Harris, okay. And one of my devotions as the chair of the Rule Committee has been to make sure that we have backup paper ballots. I have been advocating for this years. Good news, now 97% of voting places in America, in states, whatever, have backup paper ballots. The only ones that don't are a few counties in Texas and a few counties in Louisiana.
Royce White, 30 seconds.
Well, I never said that I didn't think Donald Trump lost the 2020 election in general. I was asked if he lost Minnesota. And I'm not sure that the Minnesotans back in 2020 saw the benefit of a Donald Trump leadership. Certainly people that I know personally felt very differently about Donald Trump than they do now, and for good reason. And now I think a lot of people, especially black men 18 to 44, which they're panicking about, see the America First policy approach as prudent. But again, I'm not sure what we're saying here. Either the machines are secure or they're not. Why would we need backup paper ballots if the machines are completely secure?
Next question would go to you first, Royce White. And the question is, do you support, why or why not, the expansion of the Supreme Court?
It's a tricky question. I'll say this. I'm somewhat indifferent about it. I think you can expand it to whatever odd number you want. The Supreme Court is going to be a reflection of the culture and our cultural expectations on the judicial branch. And I think if there's one place you can look at it in our country and see widespread fraud and corruption, I'm not saying the Supreme Court specifically, but just the legal field in general, it's our justice system, our criminal justice system. Amy was the lead prosecutor in Hennepin County and has participated in that justice system. I'm sure she's familiar with just how corrupt and detrimental it can be to American citizens, specifically black men. Kamala Harris would also be familiar with things like that. So I think that our problems in the legal system are widespread, and I wouldn't pick out the expansion or non-expansion of the Supreme Court as where I would start.
Senator Klobuchar, should we expand the U.S. Supreme Court?
I'm always open to looking at reform. I have to be pragmatic about things I think we can and can't do right now. I think what we can do is pass ethics legislation on the Supreme Court. That has passed through the Senate Judiciary Committee, and I believe we need that. They have claimed that they are trying to self-enforce the rules, but when you look at the free trips that Clarence Thomas took and the gifts that he was taking for people that had interest before the court, it actually kind of makes me sick. It's not the kind of judges that we have in Minnesota. It's not the kind of rules that we have in place for every federal court nominee in the United States of America. Every single federal court judge abides by certain rules, and I think that we should have the same when it comes to the justice system. I am concerned about the Supreme Court. Look at what they've done. They overturned over 50 years of precedent with Roe v. Wade. And my opponent, when that happened, said that this was the best thing that government has ever done in his lifetime. He also, of course, said that IVF, he was opposed to IVF, and he said that he was opposed to it because it was farming humans. So the Supreme Court decisions have actual impact on people's lives, and that is why I have always advocated for justices that abide by the rule of law and follow the rule of law.
30 seconds, Royce White.
Women's rights and women's reproductive rights and abortion has been weaponized against women in this country to try and blind them from all the other issues, especially the omnibus legislation and corruption there in D.C. that Amy's been a part of for 18 years and will be no different for going forward. My issue with the legal conversation is here we have a United States Senator, formerly Hennepin County lead attorney, and young black man Myron Burrell is involved in a homicide case in which his due process rights were clearly violated. He had a homicide investigator offer $500 to get his name in that investigation, and yet it was still prosecuted.
Amy Klobuchar, 30 seconds.
Myron Burrell is actually out of jail, and that sentence was reduced. But the point of it is there are two ongoing cases involving Myron Burrell, and my opponent is aware of that, and so they are pending in court. My view on the criminal justice system is, number one, government's number one job is to protect public safety. That's why I stood up for our police, and I believe that they need resources and training. At the same time, we need reform in our criminal justice system. When I was Hennepin County attorney, I did a DNA review, I stood with the Innocence Project, and I've been a huge advocate for drug courts that can make a major difference in reducing incarceration.
This is a final question before we go to closing statements. We'll start with you, Senator Klobuchar. There's been much made about the solvency of Social Security and the Medicare program. What needs to be done to secure Social Security and Medicare, and do you favor any eligibility changes for future generations?
So on the front of Social Security and Medicare, these programs have been the biggest anti-poverty programs we've in our nation. 50% of seniors rely on them for 50% of their income when it comes to Social Security. And I believe that we must protect these programs. I do not support and have voted against risky schemes that would put them out in the private market. That being said, they must be solvent. When it comes to Medicare, pharmaceuticals is a major price for both the government and individuals when it comes to Medicare. That's why I led the way. I led the bill to negotiate prescription drug prices on Medicare. One example, we've only announced the first 10. First 10, drugs like Eliquis, Xarelto, Januvia, Jardiance. Those 10 alone are going to save seniors in out-of-pocket costs, 9 million seniors, $1.5 billion. $1.5 billion in just 1 year. $35 cap on insulin for a month, that's a major game changer. $2,000 cap starting next year on out-of-pocket for seniors. These are the kinds of things we have to do when it comes to Medicare. And Social Security, as I mentioned before, keep it out of the risky schemes. But what we can do to keep it solvent forever is once you stop paying in, when you're up to $168,000 a year, you keep not paying in until you reach $400,000 in income. Then you start paying again. That simple change would keep it solvent.
Royce White, 2 minutes on the solvency of Social Security and Medicare.
Respectfully, that was just your typical 2 minutes of circle jerk talking points to keep the seniors and the people who need Social Security bogged down in a never-ending cycle of whack-a-mole, legislative whack-a-mole. The reality is we can stop from bankrupting Social Security and making it insolvent by not bankrupting the country. That's what we have to do. We have to stop bankrupting the country. We have to make this society and this economy an equity society. And I don't mean social equity. I mean economic equity. We're a debt society. So there is nowhere for the Americans who are dependent on our policy and on our production to go but into the hole. And there's and the implications are hugely connected to our foreign policy and our foreign positioning and posturing. Are we going to go to a war with Russia? Are we going to go to a potential nuclear war with Russia? How's that going to bode well for the people who need Social Security? Not just physically, maybe, but economically. I mean, what do we plan to do there on the world stage in these wars? And, Amy's voted for these wars every step of the way. And so have some of our Republican counterparts, Liz being one of them, Liz Cheney, and Mitch McConnell for that matter. I'm not a partisan hack. And the thing these people have in common is they don't like me and they don't like others who question the fundamentals of how we got where we are, where the American working class who paid in now risk being bankrupt and not getting the pay back that they were promised because we've prioritized everybody else. I don't see how people wouldn't understand that.
Senator Klobuchar, 30 seconds.
I don't have anything more to add to that.
Okay.
Rebuttal.
She didn't rebut, so you don't.
Oh, all right.
All right. We will now start with closing statements. Royce White, you have 2 minutes.
Well, I think ultimately this is an old guard versus a new generation of American politics. And look, I've met Amy twice now. I think she's a nice person on the surface, and I think we have to start to reevaluate what the standard of leadership is. When we say brave and courageous, are we going to vote for leaders who will stand up in D.C. and ask the questions that need to be asked, but more importantly, stand alone when necessary to impede the progress of legislation that doesn't help the American people? When I talked about the post-World War II democratic liberal order, it's funny to me that people say the whole system is guilty or the politics are corrupt. The prevailing political ideology in this country has prevailed since World War II. Amy and many others like her on that side and the Republican side have been in charge of that world order. And it's not a conspiracy. It's right up in your face. The central mechanism of that world order is simple: death and debt. Death and debt, money for war for profit, drugs, piracy, slavery, and all the other political sort of jargon is just a way to distract people from what's really going on. Go look at the purchasing power of the dollar for the last 100 years since the inception of the Fed, and you tell me that these economic experts deserve our trust. Go look at where this country has gone over the last 4 or 5 administrations, 6 administrations who adhere to that post-World War II democratic liberal order, and you tell me if Senator Amy Klobuchar deserves our trust. She can talk about all the legislation she's tried to pass if she wants to, but what has been the net result? And I'm not saying I'm perfect. I'm certainly not the perfect candidate, but I am somebody who will never sell out. I am somebody who hasn't taken PAC money. I am somebody who will stand up against the corrupt people in this country, win, lose, or draw.
Senator Klobuchar, 2-minute closing statement.
I want to thank WCCO and Blois for hosting this debate. The job of a senator is to represent our state on the national stage, on the world stage, and to get things done for people. My opponent says vulgar things nearly every single day on his Twitter feed, in his podcast, every single day, insulting people. That's his job. That's what he does. I think a senator is a different kind of job. I think you actually have to listen to people and get things done. He has said that the bad guys won World War II and there were no good guys in that war. That's an insult to our veterans. He has said that we should weigh out policy ideas like getting rid of the FBI when they're so important to public safety in Minnesota. He just said that this year. Or getting rid of the Federal Reserve when our economy is finally in a place where we can grow again. Or he has criticized STEM education, so important in Minnesota, and the scientific method. Or he has said his oracle is Alex Jones. He has said overturning Roe v. Wade was the best day of his life. Or he opposes IVF. These policies are way out there. That's not what Minnesota needs. I believe on taking on the challenges before us. When Big Pharma was hurting consumers, I took it on. I took on Ticketmaster. I took on the big tech companies. I am not someone that's shy about taking on big interests, and that's pretty important because not a lot of people do that in Washington right now. I do it. I believe that we need someone that's willing to stand their ground but find common ground. That's the only way we get to higher ground. So I ask the people of Minnesota, Democrats, Republicans, independents, people who love our politics, people who hate our politics, I ask for your support.
I want to thank both Senator Klobuchar and Royce White for agreeing to this debate and our listeners. We're 9 days away from election. You can follow.
At the core of Summit Orthopedics care lies the profound understanding that you are on a journey to reach your full potential, to realize your dreams, to live life at your summit. It is this understanding that drives us to provide the highest standard of treatment through every injury or aching joint and muscle that may stand in your way. Find immediate care at a Summit Orthopedics urgent care location near you.
Our daughter Jessie loves playing detective.
A clue.
But since we discovered she has sensitive skin, we've been playing detective too.
We thought the problem was our puppy.
But it was actually our old detergent.
Aha.
So we switched to Tide Free and Gentle. Tide cleans better than the leading competitive free detergent, and it doesn't leave behind irritating residues.
Plus, Tide Free and Gentle has no dyes or perfumes, so it's gentle on her skin.
Case closed.
If it's got to be clean, it's got to be Tide Free and Gentle.
Healthy baby skin starts from the bottom. Pampers Swaddlers diapers absorb wetness away from the skin better than the leading value brand, with up to 100% leak-proof protection to help keep your baby's skin dry. Don't forget to pair Pampers diapers with new Pampers Free and Gentle wipes. They clean better and are 5 times stronger than Huggies Natural Care for easy cleanup without fear of tearing, no matter the mess. For trusted protection, trust Pampers, the #1 pediatrician recommended brand.
Amazon fall favorites are here to make you say, with low prices on home, beauty, and fashion brands like Amazon Essentials. So hold on to your pumpkin spiced whatevers and save on fall favorites at Amazon.
Jordan B. Peterson, We Who Wrestle with God Tour.
If you say the truth and nothing else, you'll have an immense adventure as a consequence. You won't know what's going to happen to you, but the truth will reveal the world the way it's intended to be revealed, and the consequence for you will be that you'll have the adventure of your life.
Live across North America in 2025. Get tickets now at livenation.com.
Along here at WCCOradio.com. I'll be with Vanita at 6:20 tomorrow. Get out there and vote.
At the core of Summit Orthopedics care lies the profound understanding that you are on a journey to reach your full potential, to realize your dreams, to live life at your summit. It is this understanding that drives us to provide the highest standard of treatment through every injury or aching joint and muscle that may stand in your way. Find immediate care at a Summit Orthopedics urgent care location near you.
What's that sound? That's the sound of Downy Unstoppable scent beads going into your washing machine and giving your clothes freshness that lasts all day long. There it is again. It's like music to your ears, or more like music to your nose. That freshness is irresistible. Let's get a Downy Unstoppables bottle shake. And now a sniff solo. Nice. With Downy Unstoppables, you just toss, wash, wow, for all-day freshness.
Amazon fall favorites are here to make you say, with low prices on home, beauty, and fashion brands like Amazon Essentials. So hold on to your pumpkin spiced whatevers and save on fall favorites at Amazon.
Jordan B. Peterson, We Who Wrestle with God Tour.
If you say the truth and nothing else, you'll have an immense adventure as a consequence. You won't know what's going to happen to you, but the truth will reveal the world the way it's intended to be revealed, and the consequence for you will be that you'll have the adventure of your life.
Live across North America in 2025. Get tickets now at livenation.com.